Hey folks, today we're going to be reacting to Can You Really Make Money Betting on Sports? If you like what you see, please hit like or subscribe.
Sports betting has exploded in recent years, going from 400 million in gross revenue in 2018 to over 11 billion in 2023. In most states, you can bet on practically any game from football to lacrosse to surfing to darts. And thanks to smartphones, you can do it from anywhere at any time. What could go wrong?
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting topic because this seems to be really picking up in recent years. And unfortunately, a lot of folks, especially younger folks, are starting to lose a lot of money on apps and betting like this. So, curious to see what they're going to say on this topic.
Philip, hey, we're shooting an episode here.
Dang.
What is it?
I was one prop away from completing a 5-leg parlay. I should have shaved a few points off the spread.
Betting on games? I thought you didn't care about sports.
I don't. I was just researching the episode and kind of got hooked. Now I'll have to make long odds on that money line to break even.
Well, how much did you lose?
Today or lifetime?
In 1989, former MLB player and the then manager of the Cincinnati Reds, Pete Rose, was accused of placing bets on baseball games involving his own team, a major violation of the rules since, as a manager, he was in a position to influence the outcomes of the game. He was eventually banned from professional baseball for life, but the implications went beyond one man's career.
Congress began an investigation into sports betting, which culminated in 1992 with the passage of the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act, which essentially outlawed all gambling on sports events, except for a few states where there were already established betting markets like Nevada. Most major sports leagues, including the MLB, NBA, NHL, and NFL, supported the ban and have fought attempts to repeal it. Why? They feared that gambling scandals like Pete Rose's could shake their fans' confidence in the fairness and integrity of the games. If that happened, the whole survival of the industry could be in jeopardy.
Then, in 2018, the Supreme Court invalidated PASPA under the argument that it violated states' rights to decide for themselves. Over the next several years, more and more state legislatures voted to legalize sports gambling, and today it's legal in all but 12 US states.
The companies best positioned to take advantage of the repeal weren't gambling establishments at all, but fantasy league platforms. FanDuel and DraftKings quickly introduced real money betting options on their apps, and by the time other players tried to get into the game, they had already cornered the market. Even heavy hitters like MGM, ESPN, and Fox Sports couldn't dent their market share, which today stands at around 70%.
Part of these
So, they might be covering this soon, but wanted to call out otherwise. One of the big reasons why things like FanDuel or DraftKings became prevalent is because when they allowed certain types of gambling to exist, there was particular rules around it. And so basically they were allowed to bet on fantasy sports is basically the broad category and not on the actual teams. And so for a good portion of time, you basically couldn't bet on one particular team beating a very specific other team, but they allowed for the ability to basically make these fantasy teams and aggregate individual players across teams and then betting on those. And so that's where a lot of these became very prevalent at that time, is because this was the only way to actually enable legal gambling, especially in apps throughout a good portion of America.
companies' success lies in their constant innovation. Instead of just betting on which team wins, known as moneyline bets, or by how much, known as the spread, they allow users to place bets on many different events within a game, known as propositions or prop bets. For instance, you can bet that a certain player will hit a home run, which team will get the jump ball, or even how long the national anthem will last. Many of these bets can be made live during the game, with algorithms constantly updating the odds depending on what happens.
Perhaps their most lucrative innovation is the single game parlay, which allows you to bundle multiple bets into one big one. For instance, you could bet that the Dodgers win the game, that Ohtani gets a home run, and that the Phillies steal at least 2 bases. If all three of those things happen, you win an oversized payout, bigger than if you had bet on each one by itself.
Yeah, that seems pretty risky in so much as you're basically compounding very rare events to occur. And already, while I'm not very familiar with the odds on these particular platforms, generally speaking, gambling, the house always wins. And so they're always going to stack things in their favor. So I'm guessing the more likely you are, or the more odds you have, or each of these properties that you're adding on, um, that it will actually continue to disproportionately favor the house over you. Because if they only give you odds that kind of favor them in each of these individually, they likely compound when you start to add them on, but then they likely increase the percent multiplier or the returns on that gamble. And so it probably becomes more and more enticing, even though likely the odds are going to probably keep reducing away from you.
But if just one of them doesn't happen, you get nothing.
Single game parlays, also known as same game parlays, appeal to risk takers who dream of a big payday. But they're notoriously bad bets because the odds get exponentially worse for the bettor. According to one study, a typical moneyline bet will only mean a 5 to 6% return for the bookie. But a typical single game parlay nets a profit of around 30%.
Proponents of legalized sports gambling argue that they are merely providing a service that people want, and instead of that money going to criminals and black markets, it can now be taxed by local governments. And it's true that many states have seen significant boosts to their budgets thanks to sports betting.
But legalizing something doesn't just change the industry, it expands it. Ease of access and the decrease of social stigma has enticed many more people to get in the game. According to a Siena College survey, 39% of men 18 to 49 now bet on sports.
Wow, that's actually a pretty surprising number. I knew this was becoming prevalent, especially in younger males. You can probably see it on TikTok, or maybe you know folks who do this, but that is a pretty sizable portion, like 39%. Like you're nearing half of that population. So that's a huge grouping. And at least from what I've observed, this generally tends to lean younger. So that might mean there's actually some age groups that are actually hitting 50% or even majority of men in that age group potentially betting, since likely this 39% is not distributed evenly across everybody 18 to 49.
Among those who place bets through an online sportsbook, 38% say they gamble more than they should, and 18% say they've lost money that was needed for financial obligations. New Jersey,
Yeah, just to pause there for a second. So I definitely would discourage anyone from gambling, generally speaking, but certainly if you're going to gamble, only gamble what you're willing to lose. I know that's something that sounds good in practice, but certain ways you can do this is like you can potentially budget into your regular budget for your week or your paycheck. To set aside a certain amount. So sometimes we do this for like entertainment purposes or things like that, maybe going out to the movies or other events. And so while if you're going to do it, I think you should do it responsibly. And I think a responsible way of doing that is to set aside a particular amount of money that is not going to negatively impact your finances to a large degree, and then just bet within that amount. I think sometimes this can get out of hand, especially with another thing that comes to mind is I feel like short-term trading became pretty prevalent, I think also with a similar age group, like Robinhood, for instance. And so folks would be doing like option calls, things like that, and they would just put in some money and then they would win or lose and they'd put in more money to try to get ahead or make up for that loss. And this is definitely the most dangerous segment to be in. At least if you're going to do it, just say, I'm going to do $20 or whatever it is, win or lose, that's how much I'm going to use. Do not add any more, at least for that week or that time frame. And so really you should be holding yourself accountable to that like you would in any other aspect of your life or any other spending category.
State that led the way in repealing PASPA has seen calls to its gambling addiction helpline nearly triple since then.
New studies have found that households in states where sports betting was legalized experienced a decrease in savings and investments, a deterioration of aggregate credit scores, and an increase in bankruptcies, and that low-income households were disproportionately impacted. One of the biggest factors fueling this expansion is the smartphone. Well before gambling was legalized, software engineers and app designers had been mastering the art of influencing people's behavior through interface design, notifications, and data mining. Betting platforms collect copious amounts of information on their users, tracking their habits and weaknesses, and use it to craft bespoke notifications that keep gamblers gambling, or entice those taking a break to jump back in. Though they may position their product as just a fun, social hobby, under the hood, it's more like psychological warfare.
This thinking extends to more traditional marketing. These days, it's almost impossible to watch a sports event without being inundated with ads for one of the major betting platforms. A 2023 NCAA survey found that 52% of people were more likely to want to gamble after watching one of these ads. For people struggling with a gambling problem, that goes up to 80%. Even the league's own streaming services will sometimes offer the ability to place bets. The act of watching sports is gradually becoming inseparable from gambling.
And this has a lot of people worried about the survival of sports itself. Over the last couple years, there have been several high-profile gambling scandals. Jonte Porter, a center for the Toronto Raptors, was barred from the NBA for life for betting on games and disclosing confidential information to other bettors. Same for the Padres' Tucupita Marcano from the MLB. And the Dodgers star player Shohei Ohtani was robbed of millions of dollars by his own interpreter to pay for his gambling addiction.
Whether or not these are isolated incidents, the perception that this sort of thing goes on behind the scenes is increasing. Prop bets are particularly conducive to this kind of cynicism. The idea that one player could influence the outcome of a whole game is a bit far-fetched, but if the bet is on that player's specific performance, it's much more credible that they could alter their play for the sake of a bet. It's already common for athletes to be inundated with threats and accusations of corruption for missing a free throw or walking a batter. If fans lose confidence in the fairness of the games, that could be devastating for sports leagues and the betting companies.
Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to dismantle an industry once this kind of money is involved, so gambling will likely continue to be a part of modern sports. However, the industry may not grow as fast as it has because states that haven't legalized it yet, like California and Texas, don't seem too eager to get in the game, perhaps spooked by recent scandals.
If you live in a place where it's legal and are thinking of placing your first bet, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as you are aware of the risks and approach it as a diversion, not a sensible way to make money. The odds are always in the house's favor, especially when they're constantly being updated by an advanced AI algorithm.
And even if you score a big win, there's a chance you won't get paid out. Most sportsbooks have a clause in their terms and conditions known as obvious error, which means that if they deem the odds to be erroneously calculated, they don't have to make good on the payout. Of course,
Wow, that's a terrible clause for folks who are betting. So again, I would really generally discourage folks from betting at all, and hopefully information like this helps you step away from that or inform somebody else who you know who might be becoming addicted or potentially making unwise decisions around gambling. Because again, it's already set up to be against you from the beginning. Often you're going to end up losing more than what you gain. And it sounds like they even have clauses in here to basically avoid, in worst case scenarios of them losing too much money, they'll reverse that decision. So they can always just update the odds to be in their favor even more if an odd situation occurs. So again, I would definitely discourage this. I would discourage individuals who you're close with. There's really better ways of entertaining yourself or spending your time better than gambling. They're definitely less destructive to your lifestyle. And if you're looking to actually make money, there's certainly much better ways to make money. I think they highlighted previously on how poorer individuals are actually more likely to do betting like this. That's actually been seen with things like the lottery ticket. And so sometimes this can be done because folks are looking for like a big win. But again, it's better to make small wins consistently over time, and then those wins will grow and become bigger wins. And so I think many times if you just took whatever money you spent on the lottery tickets or scratch tickets or gambling, and you just either save that in a high yield savings account or you invested it in like an index fund, you're probably going to be better off over time, especially when these habits start to span years. You'd really be doing yourself a favor to avoid this entirely.
They don't often correct the math if it would mean having to pay out more.
If you're looking for a risky way to make money, may we instead suggest the stock market?
As we've explained before, it actually pays out more than it takes in. Unlike casinos and sports books, the average player will actually make money rather than lose it.
Which means that since 2018, you'd have made more money investing in DraftKings stock than betting on its platform.
And that's our 2 cents.
Before you go, if you're a fan of history, we want to tell you about 2 new series over on PBS Origins.
In the Margins explores the kind of lesser-known stories they didn't teach you in school. And Roots of Resistance shows how history is often made through defiance.
We'll put a link to their latest episode down below. We hope you consider subscribing too. It helps us all at PBS. Thanks. Thanks to our patrons for keeping 2 cents financially healthy. Click the link in the description to become a 2 cents patron.
Well, thank you for watching. I will see you around.